was your Alaskan cruise? Amazing. Oh, okay. Raise your hand if you accomplished your bucket list items. Somebody's missing things. Who's missing something? What have you not seen? You want to go on a glacier? Okay, you're going to have to come back for that. Unless you're going to Mount Rainier and you want to climb the mountain. Because there's glaciers up there. Because you're on your way there. You could still climb Mount Rainier and hit a glacier. Oh, flight to catch. Okay. Sorry, you'll have to come back. Southern California, yes, we do have glaciers in Mammoth. Palisade Glacier, it's melting. But if you hurry, yeah. Anybody else need something checked off still? Yes? A bear. Anybody see a bear on their adventure? What kind of bear did you see? You don't know. You didn't come to my show? Oh, through the window of the bus. Okay. I don't know if we'll be able to pull that off for you. Sorry. Anybody else? Still need, yes? A what? A puffin. Okay, that we can do today. Yeah, keep your eye on the water outside this afternoon. The little black, very small from the ship. They're going to look about that big. Puffins, totally possible. Great. Well, today we're going to, oh, yes. Blue whales? No, I've never seen one up here off the coast of British Columbia. It is possible, but it is not common. Right now, they're in Southern California, feeding on the coast, off the coast of Orange County and LA County. So, we're going to talk about whales today. And how many of you saw whales on your cruise? Oh, good. That's just about everybody. I'm hoping this evening, last week, we saw them right about the area of Cape Flattery, which is the northwesternmost point of Washington. And we're going to be passing by there tonight in the evening, maybe 6 to 8 o'clock. And there were about 250 humpback whales there last week. So you want to be outside tonight, maybe watching off in the distance, off on the right-hand side. So as soon as you see land on the right-hand side coming up, not after we've already gone in, but as soon as you see it coming up on the right-hand side, start looking for whales. And there should be some throughout the day too, just maybe not as dense as that. But they are definitely still journeying up from their mating grounds in the tropics, and they were kind of nested off of Washington. They'll make it to Alaska eventually. They just haven't gotten up there yet. So I noticed on Thursday morning, they were still in the south part of Frederick Sound. They hadn't quite gotten up to the middle and upper part of Frederick Sound where we were traveling. And remember, this was my first cruise, so I was curious to see where they had gotten to so far. They haven't quite made it to the northern reaches of their feeding grounds yet. So we're going to talk about that right now, about whales and what they do on the planet. They actually have schedules. They're busy, and they go to work just like we do. So we're going to learn a little bit about them. And if you have any questions today after the presentation, I'll meet you outside on the back steps there, on the starboard side. There's a presentation right after me. Jen's going to be in here talking about how to get off the ship, which is also very important tomorrow. So you might want to listen to that as well. So I'm Nancy Caruso. I'm a marine biologist, and I'm your naturalist on this cruise. Oh, thanks. I was narrating for you all day on Thursday and pointed out some whales for you the other night on Saturday, and hopefully be able to answer some more questions for you. I've had some lovely conversations with you throughout the cruise. Today we're going to talk about the cetaceans of the Pacific Northwest. Now the word cetacean is a scientific term. It's the order of dolphins, whales, and porpoises. And we'll talk about the ones that live up here in this region of the world because they're probably different from where you live. We're going to go over early whaling history. We'll talk about threats to whale populations, whale behaviors. We'll talk about the baleen whales and also the toothed cetaceans, the dolphins and the porpoises and the whales. So we live on planet Earth, right? And we probably should have called it planet water because it's really covered mostly with the blue stuff, right? More than 75% of the planet is covered with water, and we only kind of roam around most of the brown stuff there. And so therefore, the things in the ocean really rule the planet, right? There's more of things in the ocean than there are on the land. And there's been whales in our oceans for the last 50 million years. There's 600 species of extinct whales that have come before us and already have gone. A friend of mine is a marine biologist as well. He was diving one day off the coast of Palos Verdes, California, and there was a boulder kind of rolling around in very shallow water, rocking back and forth. As he was swimming in from his dive, he noticed it, and he noticed a vertebra on the outside of the rock. And he's a really creative, ingenious guy. He figured out how to get this giant boulder out of the ocean and into his Jeep and drove it over to the Los Angeles Museum of Natural History and found out that it was an extinct species of whale, actually alive about 10 million years ago. So he said, "I will give this to you if you let me name it after my daughter," because it wasn't named yet. So now his daughter Zoe has a whale named after her, as they identified it for him. These are the whales, the cetaceans, rather, of the world. And on this side, we have all of the baleen cetaceans. I'll tell you what that means in just a minute. There's a human, by the way, for reference of size. And these are all the toothed cetaceans. So these are your dolphins and porpoise, the smaller ones here, all with teeth. Here are your beaked whales, on up to the pilot whale and the orca, and the largest toothed whale, the sperm whale. And we have the narwhal with the one big tooth. One thing's for sure, we love whales. It's kind of an innate thing. You don't have to teach a child to love a whale. And that's something that if they see one, they automatically just, wow, they love it. And we have a strong affiliation, a strong affection for whales. But it's not always been that way. We have kind of feared whales at some portions of our history. You may remember the movie in the 70s called Orca, the Killer Whale. There were several movies made about Orca, the killer whale. Moby Dick, of course. There's lots. This is Pinocchio here over on the right-hand side. There's a ride there that was in Kennywood, Pennsylvania, where I grew up going to the amusement parks. And so we didn't always have this affection for them. They were kind of mysterious and unknown, and some of them had teeth, so a little bit scary. But we have always had a relationship with them. So going back, this is a picture taken in the late 1800s of an Alaskan native, and he's got his whaling equipment. And to this day, the people of Alaska and Canada still do whale. Some of them subsist on marine mammals in the far reaches of those regions. And this guy here's got a spear in his hand and a couple of seal bladders. And you've got to remember, this was very difficult work. You know, going out, and if anybody's a hunter, you know, hunting is kind of the easy part. You know, walking around with some sort of killing device is the easy part. Actually, getting the animal back to your home is the difficult part, especially if you're rowing in a kayak for 14 days, looking for 4 days, looking for a whale for your village to be able to eat, and then rowing it back to your village to be able to eat. So these seal bladders kind of acted. Did you see the movie Jaws? Yeah, remember in Jaws they speared the shark and they attached those blue barrels to the shark because it would buoy it up to the surface. So they would do this with the whales, and it would slow them down and eventually tire them out. You know, they'd chase them for days and days and days, and once the whale was tired out, they'd be able to make that fatal blow with the spear. And of course, none of the whale would go to waste. That would all come back. Everything was used, and a very important celebratory event to bring a whale home, because that means you had lots of food for the whole winter. I actually met a whaler. I was on a whale watching tour in Hawaii about 6 years ago, And it was just a small little Zodiac. There was about 10 people on it. And up in the front was this, I could tell he was a native Alaskan from the way that he appeared. And he had a Hope Alaska t-shirt on with a bowhead whale on it. And he was up on the front holding onto the rope, riding the bow. And when we saw the humpbacks, he was just grinning. And when we got off the boat, I said, "Are you from Hope, Alaska?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "Oh, I've always wanted to visit. This is a native village up on the west side of Alaska." And I said, "Would you mind telling me, does your village still hunt bowheads?" And he said, "Yes, I'm actually the whale hunter for our village." And I said, "Wow." I said, "Could you tell me how you do it now? I know obviously you don't go out in seal skin kayaks, paddling for 15 days to find one." And he said, "Yeah, we have a motorboat and we go out and we have explosive charges now, so it's not quite as grueling for the animal when we can get close enough to make a clean kill." And he said, "But I'm very ashamed to tell you this story because I haven't been able to kill a whale in 2 years for my village, so we're lacking in food." And this is really interesting because I visited the village of Barrow, Alaska, which is the northernmost city of the United States of America. And I hired a local guide there to take me around and show me Barrow. And what I found out from him and also from some reading is that the peoples of the northern regions, of Canada and Alaska, they've evolved there for 15,000 years. They've lived there for that long. And their bodies need the nutrition from the blubber of the marine mammals that they have evolved to eat. And they found when they started eating, processed wheat bread from the grocery store and Totino's pizza rolls, that they got really sick. Not only does it make them sick, but a case of water in Barrow, Alaska, like for 24 bottles of water to drink was $45. A frozen pizza was $26. One that's normally, $4.99 in the grocery store. So they still eat and subsist off the land in those small villages because there's no sun for 4 months out of the year in the northern reaches of North America. And without sun, your body doesn't produce what? Vitamin D. Well, guess what whale blubber and walrus blubber and seal blubber is full of? Vitamin D. Yeah, so they found that is a really important part of their diets, and they got really sick when they introduced frozen pizzas and frozen burritos and processed foods to Barrow, Alaska. So they offered me some when I was there. "Would you like to try some?" I was there in August. "Would you like to try some Christmas whale?" And I said, "What the heck's Christmas whale?" And they opened the container, and it smelled like allspice and cinnamon and nutmeg. And I went, "Oh, okay, it's whale doused with Christmas spices." And so I thought, well, I'm never going to have this opportunity again in my life. My husband went, "No, thanks." And I said, "Sure." So I didn't really enjoy it at all, but I did partake in his lunch. And he said they store all their marine mammals underneath the house because the ground's frozen. They don't have to put them in the refrigerator. And they were almost out of Christmas whale, which was okay because fall was coming and they would probably be able to get some more. I had a friend who got invited to a potlatch. Maybe you learned what that was. A potlatch is a community celebration in Alaska where everybody brings it's like a potluck kind of. Everybody brings food to share. He got invited and they offered him some harbor seal. And he said, "Of course I tried it, but it was like if you imagine a triathlete, marathon runner, and he's had the same pair of shoes for 20 years, and you take the insole out and chew on that, and he runs barefoot, and you take the insole out and chew on that. That's what he said the harbor seal tasted like." So we're not really missing it. I think I'd prefer to have the pizza for lunch today. But it's an important part and cultural part of the natives of Alaska, where they along the coast there. So foreign whaling, outside of native whaling, started in the 1800s in Alaska. Now, if you remember, the whalers lived in Cape Cod, and they had already killed all the whales up there in New England, so they had to drive their boats all the way down around South America and come up to Alaska. That's how desperate they were for whale oil. So they were driving all the way around with their ships to Alaska to go whaling, and they would process the whales back home in the early years, but then they set up whaling stations along the coast of Washington and Oregon and British Columbia from 1900 to 1960. We were still processing whales in 1960 along our coast. And what that basically means is dragging the whales up onto the beaches, boiling big vats, giant cast iron metal vats of whale blubber, and rendering down that fat to be able to put the oil into barrels. The height of recorded whaling was in 1852. Over 2,600 whales were killed in the Arctic waters, and never again did they ever catch that many whales. It was extremely dangerous work, as you can see. Even the natives, were in rowboats. So were the sailors from Cape Cod. They were up there hunting from the ships to find the whales, and then they'd go out in the small little rowboats to finish the job, essentially, and bring the whales back to the ships, where they would bring them alongside, tie them to the side of the ship, and then essentially cut them up to be able to bring the pieces aboard and then render them there. Now, whaling actually brought the Civil War to Alaska. And the Confederate ship Shenandoah came up to the Arctic June 22nd to June 28th and captured 24 Yankee whale ships and burned 20 of them and brought all the crews back as prisoner to San Francisco. But if you're a Civil War fact guy or girl, you know that the war was over at this point. They hadn't gotten the memo in the Arctic. So when they arrived in San Francisco, proud of themselves that they'd captured these Yankee ships, they said, oh yeah, by the way, the war's over. So everybody was released. This is a picture of a sperm whale, the most sought-after whale, because its giant head was full of oil. And those are seen up in the Arctic occasionally. I've seen them one day, because you can tell by the way a spout comes out of the head of a whale what species it is. The right whale was the species that was sought after on the East Coast because it was the right whale to kill. That's why it was given that name. But the sperm whale didn't sink because it was so full of oil. That head was full of spermaceti oil. And so that was a favorite of the whalers. Now, what did we use them for? Well, we made soap from them, number one, and we made oils from them. So here's an ad for the Watch and Clock Oil Company, where you see the whales there. I mean, you couldn't get away with this today, right? With dead whales on the beach, makes oils for your clock and your watch. Chrysler, sperm oil additive. That was from the 1960s. And sewing machine and bicycle oil. We didn't have the ability to synthesize these yet, and we didn't have the petroleum products yet that we have today. This is the spermaceti oil canister there for lanterns to be able to burn, because we didn't have electricity yet in some areas. And just about anything you can imagine that has plastic in it today, which is a lot, right? We used baleen from the whales because it was a flexible material, and it was, from some whales, it was 12 feet tall. So for carriage stays, for umbrella stays, for carriage suspension pieces, for corsets, actually, for just about anything you can think of that needed to be flexible and but sturdy. There's the baleen hanging from the mouth of a whale. There's the corset, which we probably could have done without those, right? Thank goodness we don't have them now. The total value of whaling products in the 21st century dollars was about $10.7 billion. So whales were very important to our society, and not because we just like to look at them, right? They might think we're a little bit crazy in 1862 that we wanted to pay money just to go out and look at them, right? Now that's a big business all of its own. But sperm whale, 5.7 billion. Whale oil was worth 3.9 billion. Baleen, $1.1 billion. Now that all came to a close in the 1973. The Marine Mammal Protection Act actually prohibits killing whales now in American waters. It is still done around the world, and we'll talk a little bit about that for different reasons. So some of the threats to whales and cetaceans in the world are noise pollution. One, this is a big issue where I live. In Southern California, we have a military training base over at San Clemente Island. And the military actually bombs the island regularly and practices sonar blasts out there. And for years and years, NOAA has been working on testing the effects of that on the local cetaceans. So noise pollution, just having lots of noise in the ocean. Water carries sound very, very easily, and whales in the Pacific can talk to each other across the Pacific Ocean via sound. So having lots of noise like ships' propellers and ships' engines actually can change the way the animals communicate. The chemical pollution, of course, we all hear lots about that, but things that are making their way into the ocean from every source on land, and this obviously has an effect on the animals. There was a study done back in the early 2000s on the Inupiaq women, which are women that live up in the northern reaches of the Arctic, and their breast milk was considered hazardous material because they ate marine mammals, and marine mammals concentrate this PCBs, DDTs, all these hazardous materials in their fat, and they were eating the blubber. That's part of their diet. So it makes its way through the food chain. I have another friend that studies white sharks, great white sharks, and she's found out that great white sharks are the top of the food chain, right? Well, we'll find that out later. And so they accumulate everything that they eat. They get the toxins from it. And so they accumulate the toxins in their flesh. And when they have a pup, when they release their pups, they have live births, they give all those toxins to their pups. So their pups are born with high levels of contaminants in their body tissue. And then they free themselves of it that way. Very interesting. Climate change is another thing that's changing our oceans. Where fisheries are found in the world are changing. We got a really good look at this really quickly during the warm water blob of 2015 to 2017. If you weren't up here, you don't live on the West Coast, you probably heard about it, but there was very warm water along the entire west coast of North America. There were tuna in Alaska. They're not supposed to be in Alaska, but the water was so warm, there were tuna in places nobody had ever seen them. So that means the dolphins and the porpoise that are chasing tuna needed to go all the way to Alaska to find them. We lost 3,000 California sea lions in 2017 because the females gave birth on Santa Barbara Island. They usually go out and fish and come back to nurse their pups every day, and they were having to go out for 3 or 4 days to find the fish that they normally found in just a couple of hours because they'd moved north. So the way things are moving around on the planet also is having an effect on these animals. You can't see that word because the light's in the way. That's the word hunting. So hunting obviously has an effect on the populations of cetaceans in the world. And this is still going on in some places, such as Asia and also in Greenland and Iceland, where they still hunt, as well as in the northern reaches of the Arctic, and subsist in some places on these whales. I found out, somebody told me they went to Greenland during the hunt. This is an annual event where they go out and kind of ranch or wrangle them up and bring them onto shore, and then they go out and actually kill them by hand. But they had whale watching tours, and then when you came back, you could have a whale burger. And I thought, that's a little strange to me, but people were doing that. Very interesting, kind of different paradigm, what we think about. Capture is a big thing. You've probably seen these films on the Cove. Dolphins and porpoise and whales are big business. And to capture one and bring it to an aquarium to be able to put on display can make somebody a whole lot of money. So this is still an issue around the world. Ship strikes are another big issue. Right, big ships, freighters, tankers, cruise ships, they hit whales. And this happens, we just had 2 of them in San Diego earlier this year. It came in on the bow of a submarine when it came into San Diego. So 2 fin whales. They're the second largest whale in the world. So it's something that, we're trying to figure out how to live with all these things that have been here for millions and millions of years. We just came on the scene. So now we got to figure out how to live in harmony with them. That's our continuous struggle. And whale entanglements, another tragic problem for the whales and the dolphins. But worldwide, there's about 30,000 a year. The United States had 105 entanglements in 2018. 2019, we had 26. So we did pretty much better. But traps, nets, this is an issue where whales are swimming by the coast on a regular basis, migrating, and they pick up the nets and the lines from these traps and nets that we put out. It happens probably I catch the news of it about 6 times a year where I live in Orange County. And SeaWorld actually does all the legwork on the East Coast and West Coast. So they put together a network. They do a lot of work for rescues, but they put a network together. And when there's a whale that's got an entanglement that gets reported, luckily there's whale watching companies up and down the whole coast that spot these. And SeaWorld will go out. They ride along and watch them essentially until they're so exhausted they give up swimming. And then, because it's just too dangerous, you can't jump on the back of a whale. But once they've tired themselves out, and people follow them until, Palos Verdes, California, and then another team comes out and follows them to Pismo Beach, California, and then another team comes out. They put strobe lights on if they can, with suction cups to try to watch them throughout the night because they don't want to lose them. And then when the whale finally gets tired, it just sits on the surface and breathes. They can take a knife on the end of a 10-foot pole and kind of slice. Can you imagine trying to slice with a knife on the end of a 10-foot pole through these hundreds and hundreds of pounds of netting that might be entangled around the whale? It doesn't work all the time. It rarely actually ever saves a whale, but we do have a network set up through SeaWorld in the United States to help these whales. So there's a hotline. There's a whole phone tree that occurs whenever a whale is spotted with entanglements, with photos and GPS locations. People report them and get the phone tree going. So again, these are all things that we've created. We're learning to live with nature around us in every way, right? Wolves, another great example. Deer on land, we have to figure out how to live in harmony with them. I know my father hated the deer eating his peaches every year. He had to figure out how to live with the deer on his property. So it's our struggle, and hopefully will be beneficial to everybody in the end. But we love whales. We're passionate about them. And the funny thing is we never know whether they're there. We can't see them. So they're kind of this mysterious thing. They're majestic. They're free, floating in the blue abyss. And they're gigantic. That's the other thing about them. We're kind of in awe of big things. So I think that's one of the reasons why we like them so much. And this is a whale I took a photo of. There's a few places in the world, like 3, where you can swim with humpback whales. And this was in Tonga and Moorea and Bora Bora. You can do that in the South Pacific. You can also do it in Dominica. And you just basically bob around in the ocean until a whale swims by. And I got just a few minutes of eye-to-eye contact with this beautiful female. And it was amazing. Of course, I cried. I cry in commercials. But I got to see this whale eye to eye. It was an amazing experience. And they're gigantic. The biggest animal on Earth is the blue whale. It's 100 feet long. The captain was telling me they were stationed off of Long Beach for like the last 4 months. And they would go to the port for just a couple of days, and then they'd go out to sea for 2 weeks, and then they'd come back to port and get provisions. And he said they were just kind of floating around in the ocean. And like I said, the whales are off the coast of Southern California right now, the blue whales. And he said the blue whale came right alongside the ship. And so he saw the whole body, and he said, my God, they're like a parking lot. 100 feet is a big, long whale. The humpback whales are about 40 feet long, 40 to 50 feet long. There's the longest dinosaur that's ever lived. There's a human, an African elephant, and there's a bottlenose dolphin, just to give you some scale. These are gargantuan animals. There you go, the size of a school bus. That's the whales that we've been seeing, the humpback whale. Basically, you're looking at a school bus swimming by. There's a scale of the blue whale all the way down to the orca. So we'll talk a little bit about whale behaviors. The breaching whale. Did anybody see this on Saturday night? Awesome. Good. Yeah, they were just jumping out of the water for no apparent reason. Hopefully they'll be doing that today. They do it, nobody knows why. They just do it because. Leap year, that's why. We can't ask them why they do that. So the theories are to make noise. They're not mating in Alaska. They're just feeding, so they're definitely not showing off. But it does make sound. They could be coming up for a look around. They could be sloughing off skin. I actually met a person whose job it was in Glacier Bay National Park. Whenever a whale would breach, she was in a little Zodiac, and she'd race over to where the whale landed, and she'd collect the skin from the whale because it comes off when they jump. Of course, that's a big impact when they hit the water. And she said it looks like a big bowl of clear gelatin. But they were using that for DNA. They could collect the genetic information, and then they could see, if whales were coming back from Hawaii year after year, and they were cataloging all the whales in Glacier Bay. So they have tail slapping, fluke slapping, and fin slapping. Anybody see this? It's a splash, but not quite as big. Yeah, very interesting. Again, not sure why. Definitely makes a sound. If they're doing it near a school of fish, it might kind of stun the fish with a percussion wave, but not really sure why they do it. Of course, they spout, and we know why they do that, because they're breathing, right? So they have these big nostrils on the top, and they're not actually exhaling water, but the water's sitting on top of their nostrils, so when they exhale the air, it kind of atomizes the water, and it creates this spray. And each whale species has a very characteristic spray. So it's based on the shape of their nostrils. And the humpback whale is a very tall columnar, I call it a chimney. It's just very tall and straight. And for instance, the gray whale has a heart-shaped spout. The sperm whale has a 45-degree angle off to the right. So the spout looks like it's coming out of one nostril and not both, because it only has one nostril. Their spy hopping is another behavior. They kind of just stick their nose up out of the water, and nobody knows why they do this, because I've seen them do it, and they don't pick their eyes up out of the water. So it was thought that they came up to look around, but I've seen many whales do this, and their eyes are still under the water. So it's definitely not always to look around. Sounding is just doing that pike dive down to get away from something, or to do a deep dive so they can swim for long distances. And if you went out whale watching, you probably learned about footprints. So whales, the humpback whales we're looking at, can hold their breath for about 5 to 15 minutes when they're feeding. They're not really down there for very long. If they're swimming long distances, they can hold their breath for as long as 45 minutes. But when they go down and they really push their tails, they'll leave this kind of smooth spot on the surface of the ocean, and that's when you know they're gone. They're not coming back. But they call that a footprint. So there are two different types of whales we've been talking about: baleen whales and toothed whales. Now we understand what the toothed whale means. They have teeth. But what is this baleen stuff we're talking about? So we'll look at the anatomy of a baleen whale. We have the mouth, of course, right? That's where this baleen is hanging down from. So if you imagine like a hairbrush, essentially, hanging from the tops of their mouths. They have blowholes. There's 2 nostrils on the blowholes. Some of them have dorsal fins. All of them, of course, have tail flukes. The humpback whale has these gigantic white pectoral fins, but all of them have pectoral fins. They have eyes, and then the baleen whales have these grooves in their throat, and that's so that their throat can expand 5 times its size to take in huge gulps of water full with food. So as I said, the baleen whales have the double nostrils there, and the toothed whales just have the single blowhole. The baleen, this is a skeleton of a bowhead whale, which you can see those, basically they look like an air conditioner filter, right? That's essentially what they are, is they're filters. But those plates hanging down from the roof of the bowhead whale's mouth, they have the longest baleen in the world, up to 12 feet long. But they essentially, they can't close their mouth. That's their mouth. That baleen hangs in there. And if you look, this is a gray whale's baleen. This is really short. It's about 18 inches long. But they're plates hanging from the roof of their mouth. They're made of the same material your fingernails are made out of. And often they're frayed at the end. You can see really that it's like a filter, like you put in your air conditioner or your recirculating air system to filter out particulates. And that's exactly what it's for. So the whales go swimming around the ocean. You can't see through the water here, so how they find their food, we're not really sure, because they're looking for small things. They don't eat big things. Small things like 6-inch fish, small little krill. And they take big gulps of the water where this food is, and they push the water through their baleen, and the food stays in their mouth because it filters it and stays in their mouth. This is the bowhead whale I was talking about. They've got these big tubercles on their heads, and they live in the northern part of the Arctic, very cold. Have a look real quick at the baleen. There's really not a lot of space between those plates, right? So that tells you it eats really, really small things. And they actually eat small little amphipods or small little shrimp that live in the mud up there. This is the whale that was used in Pinocchio, if you remember the movie Pinocchio. The bowhead whale is the longest lived whale in the world. They know that the oldest one was 211 years old when it died. It does not have a dorsal fin. They're about 65 feet long, and they live only in the Arctic and subarctic. They do vocalize, but we can't hear all the whales. You know, our sound abilities do not range all the audible sound on the planet. So if you were to listen to a bowhead whale, you wouldn't hear it, but we could tweak it to be able to understand the sounds that were being made by synthesizing them for our ears. And you think, Nancy, how do they know it's 211 years old? We can't ask it. You keep saying we can't ask it. How do we know? Well, just like us, whales have ears. They have ear holes like we do. And inside their ears, they have wax just like we do. And so when a whale dies, it can actually extract this long columnar tube of wax and slice it up and count the rings in the wax and figure out how old a whale is, like counting the rings on a tree. But even cooler than that, there was a whale found beached up in the Arctic, and they found a spearhead in it from 1880. Somebody had failed at killing this whale. It got embedded into the blubber and stayed there until it died, and they found it 133 years later. It was a living museum. It was an artifact, and they didn't find it until the whale had died. So fascinating. The fin whale is an endangered species. They also found all over the world, 90 feet long, so it's second to the blue whale, which is 100 feet long. They're the greyhounds of the seas, and they swim up to 25 miles an hour, really fast whales. They're amazing. I see these a lot. I don't see blue whales often, but I do see fin whales quite a lot every year. And they do make sound. We don't really understand where they migrate. They just kind of show up. Some whales have very known migration routes, and we'll talk about those right now. The humpback whale has a well-known migration route. As we said, they're about 40 to 50 feet long. The known migration that we're seeing is the Alaskan to Hawaii and Mexico migration route. And they have pectoral fins, a third the length of their body. They're very acrobatic. We know them to be the chorus of the sea. That's the sound, the whale song that you're probably familiar with is that of the humpback whale, because we can hear it. And here are all the migrating populations of humpbacks in the world. We have the Mexico, Alaska, the Hawaii, Alaska, but there's also South American migrants on each side of South America. We have South African migrations, as well as Australia. As I told you, I swam with the humpbacks in Moorea in the South Pacific, and they migrate down to the the Antarctic. So there's populations that don't mix, but they stay in their regions of the world, and they go from the northern latitudes to the southern latitudes based on the seasons for feeding and mating. The fastest that a whale has made it from Alaska to Hawaii was 39 days. So here is a single spout from a humpback whale, kind of like a chimney. That's what I call it. They're generally solitary, although we see them kind of in groups because they all kind of congregate where the food is. But they don't swim around in pods like an orca. They're generally solitary animals. And they get their name because of that humped back, that arch that they make in their back when they do dive. This is not one whale, this is two whales. One whale doing yoga, actually. And each of the humpback whales can be identified by the patterns on their flukes, their tail flukes. So if you got any good pictures of tail flukes, be sure to send it in. You can upload it to any of the probably a dozen websites that have IDs where they'll actually track the whales throughout the seasons and see if they go to Hawaii, which islands they go to. They're actually trying to figure out where they're going in Hawaii because they're not showing up in Maui like they used to. They think they might be going to some of the northern Hawaiian islands because we got too many whale watching boats down there harassing them when they're giving birth. So if you got any good tail pictures of the undersides of the flukes, be sure to check out those websites where you can upload them and add to the database of information. Now we're talking about what they eat. I've mentioned the word krill a few times. This is what krill is. It's actually planktonic shrimp. And plankton simply refers to any organism at the mercy of the currents. So a tuna is not planktonic. An adult tuna is not planktonic. A juvenile tuna, when they're first born and they hatch from their eggs, they are plankton. They're just floating around in the currents. And so these shrimp float around with the currents. The whales love them. This is what they love to eat. This is what gives salmon their color, by the way, because they eat a lot of krill in their lifetimes out in the ocean. They also eat capelin, herring, sardines, anchovies, small fish that are grouped together where they can get a whole lot of them in their mouth at one time. There's a feeding frenzy. These humpback whales are lunge feeding. And you can kind of get a clue when this is going to happen by watching the birds. If you see a lot of birds congregating over an area, then there's going to be some feeding going on. And I want to show you this quick little video about an interesting feeding technique that the humpback whale, they've had it for millennia, I'm sure, but we've just started visualizing it, seeing it in the 1970s. And we think it's amazing because we're humans. But the whales, again, are individual solitary animals, but obviously can communicate because they sing underwater, and they've figured out how to call to one another, group everybody together, and fish cooperatively when they find a big, giant school of fish that they want to share. Of course, they're not doing that when there's not enough, but when they want to share, they get together and they bubble net feed. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. Did anybody see it in Alaska this week? Okay. I've seen it a couple of times, but I didn't hear of anybody seeing it this week. So this is Alaska. There's a group of whales that have called to one another. They've gotten together. There's a big school of fish here. And they're all giving each other signals underwater, talking. They're going to all dive down to the bottom. They're all taking deep breaths. And they're going to encircle this giant school of fish. See the birds getting all excited? They know what's going on. So they're going down the bottom, and what they're going to do is blow bubbles from their blowholes in a circle around the fish. And those bubbles are going to rise to the surface, kind of trapping the fish in a tight circle. And as the bubbles come to the surface, the whales are going to follow them with their mouths open. See the bubbles coming up? Their mouths open, and they all just take a bite. Amazing, right? the birds aren't eating dead fish, they're getting live fish, but they're driving all the fish to the surface. So the birds, the seagulls can't eat fish that are underwater. So they're just taking advantage of the extras that don't make it into the mouth. So the humpbacks are eating 2 tons of food a day, about 120 days a year, because when they leave Alaska, there's no more food. They don't really get to eat in Hawaii. There's no food down there. So they might get a couple of little snacks on the way down, Oregon and Washington. They take about 5,000 gallons of water into their mouths. They filter that out through the baleen and suck up those fish down their grapefruit-sized throats. Remember, did you hear about that guy that got swallowed by a whale a couple of months ago? These whales have grapefruit-sized throats, so he didn't get swallowed by a whale. But you'd have thought he did, right? You can't get swallowed by a whale, unless you're a mouse, I suppose you could. The reason that they're not eating in Hawaii is the same reason why you go to Hawaii. The water's warm and clear. Now, is the water clear up here in Alaska? No. Why is that? Well, because of the currents, right? Everything on our planet is dependent on the ocean currents. Everything. Our lives are dependent on the ocean currents. And so the ocean currents are such that the water in the tropics doesn't have any nutrients. If you think about it, dead things make nutrients. Dead things make fertilizer, right? That's how we recycle things on the planet. And so at the bottom of the ocean, the deep ocean, is where the dead things are. And here, up in Alaska and British Columbia and Southern California, that water comes up from the depths and circulates via the currents and brings fertilizer to the surface. That's why the water here is green, because it's fertilized. The sun hits it for 24 hours a day in June and throughout the summer. That's why everything comes up here to eat. And the water is just filled with life. Algae, phytoplankton is algae, essentially. Zooplankton feeds on the phytoplankton, and then small fish eat that, and bigger fish eat that, on up the food chain. So the water in Alaska, all the way down to northern Baja California, is alive. Every drop of water has hundreds of microorganisms in it. The water in the tropics is dead. It has nothing in it, essentially. That's why you can see through it. You can't see through it here because there's too much life in it. So they go down there to give birth to their young because the babies don't have a lot of blubber yet, and they're cold if they were born in Alaska. So they don't get to feed down there. So they eat for 120 days up here to make the 10,000-mile journey to Hawaii and back. So they got to get a lot of food in them in that shorter period of time to get them all the way back to Alaska the next year. And this is really important for the ocean, too. Remember, everything's recycled in the universe. So the fertilized water creates the phytoplankton, creates the zooplankton, creates the krill, creates the sardines, the herons, the anchovy. The giant whales eat all that, poop in the ocean, and their poop is big. I don't know if you've ever seen whale poop before. They poop a lot, and it's big. That fertilizes the ocean too. Important for recycling nutrients in the ocean. All this has been worked out, far long before we got here. So it's really important for nutrient flow in the ocean for things to be able to grow. Everybody take a deep breath. 85% of the oxygen on our planet comes from the algae in the ocean. So that poop is important to us breathing. Remember, everything is interdependent and interconnected. I bet you didn't know you were connected to whale poop when you woke up this morning. Poop is big, important stuff. All right. Uh-oh. My slideshow just stopped here. It just stopped moving. Hi there. I don't know why that happened. Okay, hopefully that'll fix it. There we go. So mother and calf come up to Alaska together from Hawaii. The calf stays with the mother for about 1.5 years. And then on the way back, they just depart. They're on their own. The calf is now on its own. They don't interact again. Again, they're back to solitary individuals. Calf is born about 4,000 pounds, 14 feet long. Females give birth every 2 to 3 years. They have about 10 calves in their lifetime. And the baby actually drinks about 100 gallons of milk a day, gains about 80 pounds a day. And they have mammary glands, the humpbacks, right underneath their pectoral fins. So the baby doesn't actually suckle, but what she does, if you ever see a baby come alongside, she'll kind of nudge the mother right here on her side, and that means she wants to feed. So the mother actually will squeeze the muscle, and the milk, which is like really, really heavy, like lava lamp type viscous material, comes out, and the baby rolls its tongue like a straw and slurps it from the water. So they don't actually suckle on the mother. The males compete for mating. That all happens in Hawaii and Mexico, not up in Alaska. So there's no mating going on up there. So they fight each other for dominance. They draw blood from one another, jumping on each other, slapping each other. And you can go to Hawaii for the cruises this year to see all that. And I think, let's see, I got just a couple minutes here left. I'm going to go over quickly the toothed cetaceans, the toothed whales. Now, I wanted to get to this slide if I have to cut it off quickly because most people don't know this. But dolphins and porpoise are two different things. And when I was growing up, my family used those terms interchangeably. But dolphins, over on the left there, porpoise on the right, there's only 6 species of porpoise in the whole world. And if you're from anywhere other than the Pacific Northwest, you probably just have dolphins in your area. There's 33 species of them around the world. The difference comes in, most obvious, is their size. A porpoise is pretty small, 5 or 6 feet long. A dolphin is usually larger, up to 20 feet long, but usually at least 6 feet long. Notice the shape of the head. A porpoise kind of has this blunt head. A dolphin has that kind of pointed beak that we're very familiar with on the bottlenose dolphin. And then look at the fin. On a dolphin, it's that sickle-shaped fin, whereas on a porpoise, it's really small triangular fin. They also have different teeth, but that's harder to check out. So this is a dolphin we're looking for today. Pacific white-sided dolphins, my favorite dolphin. They swim in giant superpods, 1,500 of them, 2,000 of them together out in the ocean. Unlike a humpback, they are social. So they swim together in gigantic superpods. They're out fishing. They like to play. They're one of the only animals we know of that plays specifically in the ocean. Very social. They're found up and down the West Coast along North America. And we'll be watching for them today, so keep an eye out. There's what that might look like. Now, some of you might have seen this porpoise during your journey. People were asking me, is that a baby orca? No, it's a Dall's porpoise, really small, black and white. They look like that. If you saw something that looked like that swimming by the ship, they're usually in groups of 6 or less. It's probably a Dall's porpoise, but they're black and white. They look like a baby orca, but baby orcas would never be swimming alone, right? They actually are orca food. And the harbor porpoise, we did see a few of these. They usually are swimming in less than 6, group of less than 6 harbor porpoises, about 5 feet long, and they swim really slow, painfully slow. And then the orca, actually a member of the dolphin family. It's not a whale. We called it a killer whale because they kill whales. They're right now off the coast of Monterey, California, hunting baby humpback whales that are coming up from Hawaii and drowning them and eating their tongues off of Monterey, California. And the orcas are amazing animals, revered by the natives. They're extremely intelligent, hunting groups, have complex social structures, live to be up to 80 years old, and very matriarchal. The females lead the pods. The males have this giant 6-foot fin. Did anybody see them the other night? Good. But keep an eye out tonight, all through the Strait of Juan de Fuca, on our way into the Puget Sound. That's a known place where you can see orcas. There are ecotypes all over the world. In every ocean, you can find orcas. I heard about somebody who talked about them in the Gulf of Mexico a few years ago, which I had never heard before, but they can be there. They're in every ocean in the world. And I'll end with this slide. The southern resident killer whales. The killer whales, or the orcas, are usually regionalized. So there's orcas that just stay around Southeast Alaska. There's orcas that just swim up and down the coast of California. There's orcas that just eat marine mammals. There's orcas that just eat fish, including great white sharks and salmon. And this particular pod of orcas is found off the coast of British Columbia and Seattle, where we're going to be going into tonight. This particular pod was targeted for marine park exhibitions. Back in the 1960s, 65 through 75, 13 whales were unfortunately killed during captures, but 45 whales were delivered to marine parks around the world. Only one of them is still alive today, but this population is now dwindled down to about 74 animals. And it's in the Puget Sound, so in and around lots of people, so they're very heavily studied. And one of the problems is the rivers that flow into the Puget Sound have diminished salmon populations, and these guys subsist on salmon. So not only are the salmon important for all the fishermen in the Puget Sound, but they're also important for this pod of orcas. So you can check out lots of websites that are studying them. There's lots of funding going to studying them, and the state of Washington is actually creating laws to protect these orcas. They're trying to decide how far they want to go to just protect this small population. So I would encourage you to keep an eye on this news as it progresses. They actually added 2 orcas to the population in the last couple years, so we're very happy about that. Well, ladies and gentlemen, Jen's going to be out in just a moment to start her talk about how to get off the ship, which is really important. You all made it on here, now you got to make it back out. So thank you so much for attending my shows. If you have any questions, I'll be out here on the stairs. Have a wonderful day here at sea. Keep your eyes on the outside for any wildlife, and I'll see you on the ship. Thanks so much.